Hey everyone, it's Allen over at Cobblers Plus, and thank you for joining us in today's video. Today we're going to be working on a Allen Edmonds belt and shortening it. So come join us and check out how we shorten a belt. So again, thank you for joining us, and like I had mentioned, we're going to be working on shortening this Allen Edmonds belt here. I like that purple there. This is actually from a gentleman that's visited us before. He lives out of state, but had Allen Edmonds ship these directly to us. He's got like 4 belts. Janelle's working on a few of them, and I thought I'd make a video on one of these at least. Let's go ahead and put this bag out of the way for now. We'll use that for shipping back to him a little bit later. Now, belts shortening. A lot of people think that when it comes down to shortening a belt, you can punch a couple of holes here and then clip off the end or something like that. But no, that is the worst way to do it. That is not a good idea. There is only a couple of different versions of belts where you can do it because they're designed in such a manner. But a nicer, dressier belt like this, that is not a proper way of doing it whatsoever. So definitely don't recommend doing it in such a manner. And if you ever go to another cobbler shop, or if you come to us and you ask us to do that, we're gonna say nope. I mean, we can punch a couple of holes here if you like, but typically 2 holes is about the limit that I recommend. 3 holes, that's just a little much, because then you're gonna have this tab hanging out way too much. And the other thing is that obviously with the more holes there are, the weaker the material becomes. So we're gonna go ahead and get started on shortening it. So obviously, first things first, we have to undo the stitching back here. This is a double stitch right there, so it's got 2 rows, one on the bottom, one on the top. Some belts may have rivets or snaps. Some of them may have 3 or 4 rows of stitching. Some have a little bit of hand tacking, and there's a lot of different variants. So it's a little hard to tell and predict, what's the shortening of the belt going to run. Typically we could say, it ranges from here to here. I'm not going to say the amounts in video, because who knows, somebody might be watching this video a couple of years down the road and prices could have changed drastically for all we know. And I don't want to end up being, that person that has to tell you, well, that video that you watched, that was a few years back and prices have gone up, gone down, who knows. Maybe money's no longer the current currency or whatever that we're using. So it's going to cost you 2 chickens. You think that's worth it? Charles back there cracking up. Gonna be 2 chickens. Oh, you want boots resold with that too? Okay, that'll be 4 goats. That's a lot actually for a pair of boots to get resold. 4 goats. I think that's a lot. Ooh, you can get a lot for a horse. A lot of the shell enthusiasts out there, shell cordon enthusiasts, are probably like, ooh, I'll take the horse. That's my first thought right away. But alright, so we move the belt keeper here aside. Some belts have a couple of belt keepers, some just one. But here in a second, let me just go ahead and take this all apart. And come on. I think this blade is starting to get worn out a little bit, but we're just cutting through the stitches. And I gotta make sure to take this little tag off as well. So we got the belt. I'm gonna set that aside. Let's see that. Oh, that's just a safety pin. Okay. Try to use these little boxes to make sure I keep everything together from each order. But for those of you who don't know, belt keepers, obviously that's where you stick the end of the belt through and it keeps it from flopping around. But this is what the back end of it looks like majority of the time. Majority of them are stapled actually. They use certain types of staples. This one has 3 on there. Some companies will use just 1 or 2. Sometimes there's a bunch of them in there as well. Other times it can also be stitched, like hand stitching, or a machine may have stitched through it. Folded leather where it ends up getting stitched. There there are different versions of stitches, sorry, not stitches, staples, where there's sometimes maybe a wider staple, or it's a double or triple prong type or something. So there's a lot of different ones, but this one looks like they used 3 staples on it, and that's how they hold that keeper. I mean, there's nothing too wrong with that. That's very common. Certain types of belts we've had to do the same thing. We prefer to stitch them, but it's different for everyone. So now that we've got this taken apart, now you can see what it looks like underneath there. Now the camera probably won't catch it, but obviously you can tell it's all roughed up here at the bottom. And yes, that's what it is, it's roughed up. They take this to actually a sander to thin it out, because if you take a belt like this and grab it, it's actually fairly thick right here all across. You may have like a nice design slope or something, which this one does have, and a camera might not catch it, but it's very thick. And the problem is that, you know, if you try to bend it in those areas, and I'm not going to do that right now, it ends up basically being really bulged out. It could end up cracking under all that tension too. No matter the grade of leather it is, it can still crack. Even if it's a veg tanned leather that's heavily conditioned, and you start bending it to that degree, you can really do some damage. So in order to prevent that kind of cracking or bulginess, a certain portion of it from here, from right before the hole up, it gets sanded up. And also, for those of you who are wondering, obviously that hole there is for the center pin of the belt. Sometimes there are 2, sometimes they're a little bit wider. It just depends on the belt buckle itself. So nothing too fancy. Now let me grab my ruler real quick. All right, so I adjusted the camera so that everyone can see a little bit closer. Now we're gonna flip this upside down so that we can get in here. Grab a pen and our ruler. So we're shortening this 3 inches. This is a 42-inch belt, and we're shortening it 3 inches. So from the back end, we're gonna go ahead and measure out the 3 inches right there. And this is where we're gonna cut. Okay. So you probably can't quite see it, maybe just a little bit right there. And then, now a lot of times we'd use scissors like this or a 5-in-1, but it really depends on the type of belt. This one, however, because it doesn't have any stitching on the side, and this is, you know, this belt's got that kind of coloring on there and everything, I'm going to go ahead and use this knife right here and just go ahead and hammer it. So make sure I got everything evened out. Perfect. That knife is like the perfect width. I have to reach my hammer. Oh no, we got a tiny little piece that got stuck. Okay, but it's good. There we go. See, look at that thickness difference right there. So they really beveled it down quite a bit. Now obviously you can see there's a single row of stitching right there that's still pointing through. That's why I didn't pull the stitches of any kind yet. That right there is not going to be visible because it's going to be folded under since everything's being shifted over. Now at this point I want to see how everything is. Okay, I'm not going to quite yet mark it up because I'm going to have to sand it. Well, actually I will mark it up because I want to know where I'm sanding to. Now I'm going to have to go through and remark it one more time. Okay, so that's roughly where that hole there is. And then those little corner pieces, I'm going to go ahead and chop those off right now. Oops, messing with my camera there. For that I don't really need the hammer. I just press it down because it's a smaller piece. There we go. So now it's got the beautiful notches. Now at this point I can go ahead and pull out the stitches. Now typically you can just grab them if you can pick them up. There we go. And toss them in the trash can, and I completely missed the trash can next to me. There we go. Try to make sure I got all the stitches out. Have to grab that safety pin from earlier. I don't like leaving stitches behind. I really hate leaving the stitches. So There we go. So maybe if the camera will catch it, you can see all that light through there. That means all the stitches are pulled out. Alright, let me fix that camera angle again because I kind of tilted it a little bit with my elbow. Okay, so we've got that taken care of. Now, at this point, we've got it marked up underneath. Oops. I keep touching this. Sorry, everyone. I keep messing with the camera stand here. I'll mark this right here because that's where they had the sanding done. It started there, and then it kind of tapered down to a certain thickness right here, and then right about at that tip they really narrowed it down significantly. So I'm going to go ahead and take this now over to the machine and start sanding it down a bit. Now there are other tools. Jamal probably has it. There we go. You can use our skivers like these here. You just basically run it across right here and it cuts out pieces. But because of the type of belt this is, if I try to pull it too much, it's going to shift around on me on this piece of leather, and we're going to kind of damage that finish too much. We don't want to do that. Plus, originally from the factory, looks like they sanded it. Well, they sanded it, it's kind of rough, so it feels like they almost sanded it on something like a 40 grit sandpaper, which is a little bit on the rougher side. We're going to take it to our 100 grit sandpaper, which is going to be a little bit more delicate and a little more refined, in other words. So let's go ahead and shift over to the machine now. Alright everyone, so as you can tell, we got it all sanded up, and it's still obviously rough looking, but it's a lot smoother feeling than what it was originally and stuff. Now, as you can tell, this one looks kind of dirty and stuff like that. That's actually intentional, because when it gets folded over, they'd rather have it be a little bit on the darker side, because once this right here is folded like that, you may end up accidentally seeing just a tiny bit of that lighter color there somehow at certain angles and everything. So it's always a good idea to touch it up. Now, depending on the type of leather, how we finish it, whether we cut it or anything, we'll either take it to our buffing wheel and just buff it off, put a little bit of a coating of some kind, an acrylic paint, or a number of different ways. Now, I'm going to be using the Juvacure here. Obviously, you can see that bottle's been used a number of times. I like this stuff for belts especially and all that. I just don't like the tubes because I gotta shake it around like crazy. But, you know, just go through all those areas there. Oh, keep hitting that camera. I don't really need to go that far technically, but it's just like that. Obviously there's a few light spots here and there, but we don't want to put too much on there necessarily. It's just enough basically to have everything set in there well on the very edges. And then as far as like the very edge here, now depending on what it's like, sometimes we'll either do a acrylic sealant on one of the edges or something else, but I'm gonna go ahead and use some more of the Juvacure on this one, right on that very tip, because it soaks in just a little bit better when we use an acrylic sealant. Oh, excuse me. Because of an acrylic sealant, it's usually designed for edge coating and stuff like that around the edges everywhere here. It settles over top, where this stuff, it kind of penetrates just a little bit deeper. So I think on this particular belt might just be a better way to go. Now, get the safety pin back over here. Back to this same little piece here. Now I can mark up where the center of this hole right here is. Right there. There we go. And then Janelle's got the punch tool it is. I guess she's been using it this whole time. But this is the piece that it cuts out like that right there. Just kind of a chunk, in other words. And that's what we're going to go ahead and do with this one. Let's see, centered. Okay. Grab my mallet. Here comes some noise. Ouch. This is a lot harder with the camera in the way. I hope everyone's enjoying it. I'm not getting good enough surface area of cutting. Sorry for the interruptions. So, back at it again. I'm trying to hammer here with... Now typically I'll do this a lot of times on my last and everything, but it's a little hard. So you can see that piece inside there. Oh, looks like I got a chunk fall out onto my finger there from the previous belt. We usually try to clean them out, but right now we're doing a number of belts, so they just kind of layer through and just push out through the hole inside here. So that's that punch tool there for you. Okay, double check the back side there. Looks like I might need to do just a minor touch up with one little scrabbly piece here. There we go. Okay. Alright, so like that there. Now, don't try this at home. I'm going to grab a lighter real quick and just very quickly bend it in half and just burn those edges just a little bit. There we go. Because of the finish that they put on here, it kind of helps a little bit to get everything pressed out in that area. Alright, so now we can grab our belt buckle. We're going to leave the loop out for just a minute because that will go on last. And see how everything sits. Looks good right there. Now, the only other thing actually before the belt buckle will go in it and we finally stitch it in. Make sure. Okay, there we go. Alright, now I can take the belt buckle back out. Go back to the Juvacure. Grab a little Q-tip like that here, and this is not always a necessity, but kind of helps get a little bit of love. Where did I just put the... Oh, it's right in front of me. Thought I lost track of the Juvacure. Shake it a lot without it splattering all over the place. And I just need a little bit, because I'm going to do this from the back end. Go ahead and go around inside here just at least a little. Gives it a nice darkening up as well. If you ever come into our shop and wonder, oh no, he's got dye on his hands and he's going to be touching my suede shoes or something. Majority of the time, if I'm grabbing shoes like that, I'm either going to be extremely careful with it, or it's just all dried up and not coming off after a couple of washes. It takes about a dozen washes on some dyes for it to come off the hands. There we go. So it's darkened up in there. Now obviously it's not completely black, but it's darkened up to a point where it's not going to stand out like crazy. Putting too much in there, I don't want to do that, because this does have waxes in there as well, and just too much layers of waxes is not going to be good. It's got less waxes than this, it seems like, but definitely more than I'd want to have in there if I just layer a thick coat on. So now we've got that. Make sure it dries for just a couple of minutes, and now we can go ahead and switch on over to our stitcher and let you check that out. Alright, so we're over here at our other machine. This is our Clay's patch machine that has kind of like a walking foot. I put a little bit of tape on here because it's got these little jagged teeth on the bottom, and since this one's got a bit of a thicker finish, I don't want to scratch it too much. I got a nice thin needle on here, and I just took a ruler and just kind of like ran it back and forth right across here to make sure that it's as evened out as possible. Now I'm just gonna hand crank it. Now I know a number of cobblers and a number of people might say, oh, he's not pushing the pedal for the motor to run and stuff, so he's not a professional. No, I do that on purpose because I want to make sure it's done perfect. I crank my machines by hand sometimes like this. If it's a long piece of something, I'll push the pedal and then the motor will kick in and then the foot will just move on its own. So I started close to the center right here with my stitches, and that's locking the stitch. So now I'm going to start going back through the same holes and everything. And that way the stitches don't unravel that easily, and if they do unravel, they're going to be nice and secured. And see, that's the other thing. When you do it by hand, you make into all the original holes and everything. Clip it right there. Okay, voila. Just take this little pink lighter real quick to this to burn off the ends, because obviously this is a nylon thread and it melts, so it kind of helps it a little bit. Now I'm going to go ahead and grab the belt loop real quick, the belt keeper. Forgot that on my workbench. And alright, so I've got the keeper on there, for anyone wondering. Sorry, I don't know if I caught that before, but there's the stitch there. But there's the line right there that I just use a ruler to kind of mark for me. And that line obviously is going to be overlapped by stitching anyways, so it ain't going to be visible. Now, go ahead and do the same thing. Yep. Down to the thread is trying to get in the way. Have to reach in there. Come on, get out of the way. There we go. Then this thread right here was trying to get in underneath the needle and get all tangled up and stuff, so that's the other reason why I like to be a little more cautious and stop. Okay. Okay. And yes, I'm tilting my head underneath to see it, so you probably don't see my head tilting off screen, but I'm not just feeling around to clip it, I'm actually looking where I'm clipping. Okay, back to the lighter. Alright, now back to the workbench. Alright everyone, so we got everything finished out. Did a little bit of extra hammering. Now, at this point, I mean, obviously you can tell that there's, on the back end, there's the holes left over from the previous stitches. There's not much that can be done about that. Sometimes if you're only needing like an inch, maybe 2 inches shortened, you actually have a part of that original notch from the hole right on the back end here showing, and so you got to kind of consider that too. Also, the belts that have maybe 3 or 4 rows of stitching, that just means that there's a longer tab underneath when they have 2 belt keepers or 3, so that means there's a high probability that on the back side there may be some things that are kind of visible, you know, like the holes or where everything was sitting. That's actually a fairly common thing. There's no way of avoiding that, you know, that there's a hole that was cut, the needle went through, the snap went through, whatever it is, there's just no avoiding it. So I just wanted to mention that. So if you have like a really crazy high-end belt, a low-end belt, it doesn't matter what kind it is, that's normal, that's part of it. If you want it shortened, you know, you may have some things that even for us, we're not too excited about, because we don't like the fact that there are holes left over on the back end here. But it's very common and it happens, you know, especially if you're just shortening a couple of inches. If you're shortening 5 or 6 inches, majority of the time at that point there's nothing left behind, because there's a clean slate. There are no holes that were punched in those spots there. But that gives you an idea of how a belt is shortened. We've got the old chunk here like that. Typically they just go in the trash and everything. There's not much needed for it. There's the old tag that was stitched in there. Now these guys, I mean, we don't bother stitching them back in. There's no need for them, because that's just the barcode and, you know, the style number and everything. Although there are some belts that have like certain numbering and tagging on it that's kind of needed to stay on there, just because it identifies the type of belt it is and that it's an original, not a knockoff. Now there aren't really any knockoffs for Allen Edmonds belts, at least not that I've seen. So there isn't any specific numbering or coding that's needed on it. Any of the other information is usually printed on the back of the belt like that. One last thing I'll touch on also, keep in mind that obviously we try to do as best we can, as perfectly as we can, as far as like the stitching and how everything is laid out and cut and all that. Sometimes there may be some minor imperfections from other cobblers or whatever type of belt it is, and may prevent us from making it look perfect. There may be a mishap with some kind of stitching or some marking. Don't get frustrated. Again, we're not shortening from this side here that's visible, so if there's any kind of issues under here, as long as there's no damage to that holder and there's no actual damage that's you know, structurally damaging, if it's just aesthetics, don't get too frustrated. It can happen. I've seen some cobblers, they accidentally, you know, they have a mishap with their machine, the stitching gets a little funky looking or something. You're usually, when you're wearing a belt, we'll put it through the center hole here like that, usually your belt is like that right there. So anything as far as stitching underneath is not visible. Any of the holes right here, they're up against your pants, so none of that's visible. Don't get too frustrated or too upset about, oh no, the stitching's a little off. Again, if it's structural integrity that you're concerned about, then that might be a questionable thing and a well-worthy thing that you need to say, hey, can you fix this, can you redo it or something? That's understandable. Aesthetics, you know, it's not a visible spot. We'll do the best we can to always make it as perfect as we can, but if you're at a cobbler shop anywhere else and there's a slight mishap, don't get too frustrated. You know, it can happen. It's sometimes, you know, certain things that just can go wrong with either the machines or, you know, the type of belt it is. Sorry, got interrupted there, but yeah, I've had some interesting issues before with belts where it was like like one of those uncuttable belts, and it turns out it had like a steel or some form of metal mesh on the inside of the belt that wasn't visible. Basically it just came up to right where the stitches are and everything, and it's kind of interesting that you just couldn't see that. So when it came to cutting it, it was horrible, just horrible trying to cut it. Quite literally, it's supposed to be uncuttable, but somehow I did it. I honestly don't remember how. It's been a long time since I had to mess with that kind of issue. But anyways, now at this point we're all done. The other belts are taken care of, and we're gonna pack them away and ship them. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you have any other questions or comments, leave them down below. Otherwise, you could always give us a call, send us an email, check out our site. We're actually working on finishing out this site at the time of the recording, so most likely by the time we're done recording, the new site should be up and running. There isn't everything on there, so just kind of you know, if you have questions or if there's something not listed that you're wanting, like a product or a service, you could always email us about it, or send in a blank form with all your contact information, and we'll get it taken care of for you. Otherwise, if you like the video, give us a thumbs up. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell icon to be notified when we have our next videos out, and we'll see you next time.